Aviation will come to order. Ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered.
I also ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions.
Without objection, so ordered.
As a reminder, if a member wishes to insert a document into the record, please also email it to documents.ti, capital T-I, at mail.house.gov.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. I now recognize myself for the purpose of the opening statement for 5 minutes. I want to begin by thanking Administrator Whitaker for being here, and I want to thank you and your team for all of your efforts to keep the subcommittee, to keep the committee apprised of everything going on regarding Boeing's corrective action plan in the wake of Alaska Airlines Flight 1282. I also want to take a minute to thank NTSB and the chair for all their efforts to keep us apprised as well. But the FAA and the staff have been very communicative on the status of efforts on the action plan, and we are very appreciative of that. Look, it's no secret, and we talk about it in almost every aviation hearing, that the United States has the gold standard of aviation. Some of the incidents that have happened in recent months and years have certainly called that into question and caused us to ensure that we're not, to ensure that we're staying on top of that, ensure that we're continuing to work to maintain that standard, to improve that standard. Boeing's continuing challenges that were exemplified by the Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 door plug accident represents one of the most visible elements of an aviation system that's been strained and sometimes past the breaking point. In the wake of the door plug accident, you took immediate action to enhance oversight of Boeing's production facilities while also demanding the company develop, present, and most importantly, implement a comprehensive action plan to address production deficiencies. Today, we're here to learn more about how this plan is being implemented, as well as what we can expect from Boeing, FAA's oversight of Boeing in the weeks, months, and years to come. I do, however, want to issue a word of warning. This latest challenge comes as your agency is tasked with not only implementing a historic 1,000-page FAA reauthorization bill that governs aviation over the next 5 years, a mandate with explicit timelines in many cases, with urgent actions to improve aviation efficiency and safety, that is going to be incredibly time-consuming. But I also want to remind you that the FAA is also tasked with continuing to implement and conduct oversight over the 2020 Aircraft Certification, Safety, and Accountability Act, a law that made a bipartisan law that came out of this committee that made targeted reforms to improve aircraft certification processes following the two 737 MAX 8 crashes in 2018 and 2019. We've discussed in the past some of the delays in implementing provisions from 2016 and 2018 FAA bills, and as I've said to you, and to be fair, you've inherited much of this, but I do want to make crystal clear from this committee's perspective, and I think I can speak on behalf of my friend Ranking Member Cohen as well, we cannot continue this trajectory of slow implementation or not implementing. We did a tremendous amount of work, as did the aviation teams, in getting to a bipartisan agreement in an environment where people can't agree upon motherhood and apple pie in this Congress, and we expect that that's going to be implemented with urgency. At the same time, the FAA moves forward with the Boeing oversight plan. You can walk and chew gum. We're confident your agency can as well. Implementation of the 2018 FAA reauthorization bill and many other necessary initiatives were partially derailed by FAA's response to the last Boeing oversight challenge. But that can't happen again, regardless of the challenges facing FAA and Boeing. The FAA must be able to move forward and do its full mission. So today, Administrator, we want to hear about the steps being taken by the agency and Boeing to ensure that we're minimizing risk and making certain that safety comes first and foremost at all levels, from the C-suite to the factory floor, when it comes to building airplanes in Boeing facilities. We also want to hear about what the FAA is doing beyond the immediate response to these issues and learn about how the safety implementation bill is progressing and how FAA is going to ensure that day-to-day crises don't derail the year-to-year strategies. I look forward to hearing your testimony, and thank you for being here today. I now recognize Ranking Member Cohen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Administrator Whitaker, for being with us today. We are here to discuss Boeing, not Boeing's problem with getting capsules up to and carrying back astronauts from the space station, and not concerning their pension plan, where they took from the employees about a decade ago, and the employees would like to get that fixed pension plan back. But we're here to discuss Boeing's ongoing challenges, as Mr. Graves has well pointed out, with safety, production quality, and company culture, which we're reminded of, unfortunately, in dramatic fashion with the door failure, the plug failure. Before I get to that, though, I do want to reemphasize what Mr. Graves mentioned about all of the things that are in the reauthorization bill. I get a lot of calls from people, have for years, about the EVAC Act and having a process we know we're getting people off the airplanes in the required time that's set out there. We're not doing it. And the studies that they do in Oklahoma City are ridiculous. They don't have sample passengers of a typical airplane. People who wear braces, who have wheelchairs, who have crutches, who have babies, who have help dogs, who are just old and a bit infirm, or really young and in their mother's arms. We've got to have another test soon that has real plane-like, lifelike features. I hope you'll look into that. And the other issues we had with safety. A lot of people are real happy about the issues that we put in there that draw attention to people with disabilities, to make sure those are implemented. I know you will, but I want to emphasize that. The FAA and the NTSBA immediately began independent concurrent investigations on the Boeing plug failure. And we went over and we saw the items and all of them. Ms. Hamady did a great job. The FAA also told Boeing to create a plan to address known issues at the time, and the plan was submitted to the FAA at the end of May. Now that Boeing has begun implementing its safety and quality plan, and the FAA has begun conducting its additional oversight, it's time to examine whether promised changes are being made and whether promised improvements are being attained. I was real critical of Boeing, and properly so, when they had the two plane accidents, crashes. The Boeing's top dog resigned finally. First he said he was whatever, but he wasn't taking a pay cut or anything else. Well, he's gone. It's amazing this has continued. You thought that would be a wake-up call. And I've tried since to kind of understand and think about Boeing as one of America's premier companies, one that we've been proud of, iconic, and we don't want Airbus to get all the planes. But Boeing keeps messing up. For America's interest, Boeing needs to get its act together. They want to be a good citizen. Be safe. And I know you'll oversee them and see that they are. Congress must continue to hold Boeing accountable for the safety of its aircraft and continue to hold the FAA accountable also for its oversight of manufacturers' design and production processes. Moreover, while we are here today, I go on record and thank NTSB Chair Jennifer Hamady and all the NTSB investigators again for their vigorous efforts as they work alongside FAA to expose critical issues and increase the safety of air transportation. Our subcommittee will work with all the relevant parties to enact any legislative changes necessary to resolve quality control problems, strengthen oversight of aircraft manufacturers and suppliers, and prevent further safety issues from arising. I was pleased Boeing chose an engineer and not a business person driven by a bottom line that they were all considering, but their stock keeps going down even quicker than some of their airplanes have. So they need to worry about that. Thank you, Administrator Whitaker, for being here today, and I look forward to our discussion and our work over the next years.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. Recognize Ranking Member Larson for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Graves, for calling this hearing today. Today, we're really having two hearings in one. The first, motivated by the aftermath of the January 5th Boeing 737 MAX door plug accident, which will examine Boeing's safety culture problems, the FAA's subsequent investigation, and Boeing's comprehensive action plan to address these issues. The second will evaluate the FAA's general oversight of U.S. aviation manufacturing and the implications of any necessary reforms. Towards this end, we have to ensure the FAA has resources and tools that it needs to effectively conduct its investigation and help prevent accidents like this from happening again. Just as we did nearly 5 years ago, this committee must remain vigilant in our oversight and authorization roles and hold those responsible accountable wherever the FAA and the NTSB investigations lead. On January 5th, 2024, a door plug was torn from a 737 MAX 9 aircraft shortly after it departed Portland International Airport, forcing that flight and the flight crew to make an emergency landing and return to Portland. This event was terrifying to all of those on board, but thanks to the calm and professional actions of Alaska's flight crew, everyone returned to the ground safely. Shortly thereafter, the FAA cautiously and rightfully grounded the U.S. 737 MAX 9 fleet for nearly 20 days, and the NTSB initiated an accident investigation. The FAA also initiated a concurrent but separate investigation and further announced an audit of the 737 MAX production lines and its suppliers. The FAA has also placed a further safety limitation on Boeing, prohibiting any increase in the production rate of the 737 MAX aircraft. This limit is still in place and will remain until the FAA is satisfied that certain, quote, quality control issues uncovered during this process are resolved, end quote. Unfortunately, it's not the first time we've seen quality control and production issues at Boeing's facilities. In May of 2021, then Chair DeFazio and I wrote to the Department of Transportation, the FAA, and Boeing with concerns about no less than 9 reports of quality control issues at Boeing production facilities. Since then, there have been dozens more reports leading to emergency fixes in the fleet and halts in production. Given the pervasiveness of these issues across multiple locations, experts have pointed to an overarching cultural problem within the company. And it goes without saying the safety culture of any institution flows from the top. However, a shakeup in leadership is not the final answer. It is only the beginning. The company must work to revamp its safety culture, particularly as it relates to its relationship with its greatest asset, its workers. The flying public deserves answers, and I'm committed to using all the tools at my disposal to get them. I do want to highlight what I'm hearing back home in Washington State. In the Pacific Northwest, aviation and aerospace are part of our DNA. And more than 30,000 dedicated women and men go to work each day at the Boeing plant in Everett and throughout the state. These are hardworking individuals who punch the clock day in, day out, make significant contributions to our local communities. The consequences of Boeing leadership's repeated safety and quality missteps are felt hardest by the workforce, who strive each and every day to ensure Boeing's aircraft remain the safest in the world, but are not always given the resources or direction to fulfill those duties. They deserve answers as well. I'm grateful to all the Boeing workers that have come forward with information for the various federal investigations and have made their own recommendations. However, these issues and the FAA's response extend well beyond Boeing and beyond Washington State. Boeing is the largest exporter in the country, so these issues impact the entire U.S. economy. They impact workers across the country. They impact passengers' travel and the confidence of the flying public. They impact the supply chains that circle the globe. It's not enough to build airplanes in the U.S. U.S. aviation must build safe airplanes in the U.S. And how the Congress and the FAA respond to this event will have lasting repercussions. We have to get these changes right, and not just for Boeing's sake, but for the sake of aviation manufacturing throughout the country and throughout the world. As more is uncovered, it falls on Congress to support the FAA and NTSB in their ongoing investigations and to take the necessary actions to ensure the safety of our skies. The Boeing 737 MAX 9 door plug accident is yet another reminder of the importance of this committee's work, of the FAA's efforts, and what is at stake if we don't remain vigilant in addressing systemic safety issues in the U.S. aviation ecosystem. Now, with a plan in place to begin Boeing's cultural course correction, I look forward to hearing from Administrator Whitaker about how the action plan was developed, what role the FAA played in its creation, any progress or lack thereof with its implementation, and how the FAA plans to keep Boeing accountable to its execution. The U.S. is the leader in global aviation, and this committee's efforts, along with the FAA, will have profound implications for air travel around the world. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. I would again like to thank our witness, Administrator Whitaker, for being here today.
Briefly, I'd like to explain our system, which I imagine you understand already, the red, the green, and the yellow. You got 5 minutes, but when you get down to 4 minutes, the yellow light goes on instead of the green light. And then when you get to no time left, red, stop. Ask unanimous consent the witness's full statement be included in the record,
Without objection, so ordered.
and ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing.
Without objection, so ordered.
And also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or the witness to be included in the record of today's hearing.
Without objection, so
And
ordered.
I also ask that the administrator be held in contempt if he doesn't get all that done. Just a joke. Just a joke.
Reserving the right to object. As your written testimony has been included in the hearing record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. And with that, Administrator Whitaker, thanks again for being here, and you're recognized for 5 minutes for your oral testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Graves, Ranking Members Larson and Cohen, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. In early June, I had the opportunity to brief this committee on the agency's oversight of Boeing's production and manufacturing processes. And today I want to provide an update on our progress since then. This past February, I directed Boeing to develop a comprehensive plan to fix its systematic quality control and production issues. This plan was required to incorporate the results of FAA's special audit, as well as the findings and recommendations of the Section 103 panel. Boeing provided that plan to the FAA on May 30th. Let me be clear, this plan does not mark the end of the FAA's increased oversight of Boeing and its suppliers. There must be a profound shift in the company's safety culture to holistically address its quality assurance and production challenges. Our goal is to make sure Boeing implements the necessary changes and has the right tools in place to sustain those changes in the long term. Since January 5th, we have added more safety inspectors at Boeing and Spirit facilities, and we will maintain our increased on-site presence. Our oversight activities include more direct engagement with company employees, additional inspections at critical points of the production process, and increased auditing of quality systems and build processes. Our safety inspectors are embedded in each of the Boeing teams implementing the key components of the plan, allowing us to provide direct feedback on any proposed changes to the plan. We are closely reviewing Boeing's performance metrics to evaluate the overall health of their production system and will independently assess any early indicators of risk within the system. In addition to the work the safety inspectors are doing on the production oversight, we also have hundreds of FAA personnel who are focused on other aspects of our Boeing oversight. These employees are monitoring the in-service fleet through our continued operational safety program, overseeing Boeing's ODA, and conducting certification activities. Addressing these issues also requires FAA to continually examine the effectiveness of our own oversight model. We must be proactive and establish more dynamic oversight protocols that address changing technologies and changing business models, and allow us to identify and mitigate risks before they manifest themselves as events. As a first step, we are reevaluating our current safety oversight models and establishing a strategy to revamp our agency-wide safety management program. As part of this strategy, we will reconstitute our executive committee that oversees regulatory oversight and safety management programs, and this group, which I will chair, will continually monitor the safety performance and health of the system as a whole and drive a process to continuously improve and update our oversight models. We are also examining opportunities to better leverage our vast data resources to become more predictive in identifying risks across the aviation system. To this end, the agency is undertaking a fresh look at our current capabilities to provide more real-time insight into emerging safety trends and to share relevant data across various components of our safety ecosystem. To conclude, I want to stress that safety and the integrity of our air transportation system relies heavily on the operators in that system, all operators having a strong safety culture, a culture where safety is first, not in name only, but in how the operation is run. Safety must come before financial incentives, production targets, or operational goals. And employees must have the ability, and in fact be encouraged, to speak up and come forward with safety concerns without fear of reprisal. They must have confidence in the process to know that their report will be investigated thoroughly. And just as Boeing must develop a strong safety culture, so must all operators in our national airspace. Congress has expanded SMS requirements to most major operators in the system, including the major airlines, Part 135 operators, airports, and aircraft manufacturers. Having a robust SMS is key to operating safely within our system. It provides a structured, repeatable, systematic approach to managing risk. Ultimately, we must ensure that all operators participate in these programs, including new entrants. As we integrate these non-traditional operators into our airspace, whether advanced air mobility or commercial space operators, they must embrace SMS and the tenets of a healthy safety culture in order to ensure we continue to have the safest aerospace system in the world. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Administrator. I appreciate your testimony. The gentleman from Georgia, would you like to go first? Gentleman, if not, gentleman from New York.
Well, thank you, Mr.
From New York, Mr. Molinaro is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, if I might, I seek unanimous consent to enter a statement regarding Mammoth Freighters in committee.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Whitaker, thanks very much for being here. I heard you talk about the changes at FAA to obviously address the needed oversight. Continued a process to improve oversight models. Give me a practical application of what that might look like, and additionally, how might that change at FAA? How might that change? Called into question, release, alerted us of the potential risk of the Alaska airline incident.
Thank you, sir. So I think one feature is we need to not set an oversight model in place and just let it run forever. So I think we need to constantly see, are we looking at the right data? As business models change, as technology changes. I think a good example of a more dynamic approach is how we oversee airlines. We have an index that accounts for about a dozen different data points, and that index gives us a real-time picture of how the airlines are doing, how they're trending, and if we start to see a trend that we don't like, we implement an audit that's tied to those features.
So we know from your report, and of course, Boeing's response to the incident, what was the trend that might have been identified in this particular case to have helped us avert such a tragic situation?
So I think if you look at what we have implemented since January 5th, we put in these key performance indicators. There are 6 of them, and they give us a reading month by month on how Boeing is doing in those 6 areas. That includes how much travel worked, how much work is done out of order in the manufacturing process, for example. That indicator would have shown that there was a lot of work being done out of process, which creates a safety risk because work is done not on the factory floor, but when the airplane's already been pushed out on the tarmac and it's not part of the system. So we would have that real-time sort of monthly indicator to show us if things are moving in the wrong direction.
So do you feel confident at this point that Boeing has, switching to Boeing's and attention to Boeing, has made adequate adjustments to at least the culture to address these safety issues?
So I think there are really 2 parts to the plan with Boeing. One is the short term and one is long term. And I would put culture in the long term category. It is not a 6-month program, it's a 3-year to 5-year program. There has been significant progress made, for example, on traveled work. Boeing moved about 100 inspectors down to Wichita to Spirit to make sure that the product coming out of Spirit was properly completed. So there's been some short-term progress, but on culture, I think it's a long-term project, and I've talked to the board and the CEO about the need to be in it for the long term and making sure they arrive in that place.
But it is fair to say that you feel that at the very least, both short-term and long-term, Boeing is making adequate adjustments to provide for safety in the immediate situation and address the cultural deficiencies?
We are currently writing the airworthiness certificate on each aircraft. Normally, that would be delegated to Boeing, but we have taken that over so that we're making sure that every airplane comes out of there is safe. So we're not to the point where we're turning that over. We are working with them to develop their safety management system, and we're in it pretty intensively with them. So we're monitoring that progress. There is progress, but they're not where they need to be yet.
So my constituents will ask the very simple question, is it safe to fly in a Boeing 737 MAX 9?
It is safe. We certify each one of them. We do a final inspection in addition to the Boeing inspection, so we're keeping a close eye on that.
So I'll see you on one. I do want to just express our appreciation for your leadership at FAA. I know, obviously, implementing the reauthorization package, 1,000 some odd pages, and for the airports that I represent, or at least the people in the communities with those airports, regional airports, Binghamton, Ithaca, and now to a degree the Capital District in Albany, New York, greater investment in those smaller regional airports, critically important not only to moving people, but to building up economies. Look forward to your partnership and grateful that you are at the helm at this moment. Thanks very much. I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New York yields back. Gentleman from Tennessee, Ranking Member Cohen is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Graves. Mr. Whitaker, as you well know, the plans often must be revised during the execution to reflect unforeseen challenges and factors. Over the past few months, has Boeing taken any additional steps outside its safety and quality plan in response to new discoveries or new information?
I'm sorry, sir. I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing. Could you just repeat the question, please?
As we all know, plans often must be revised during execution to reflect unforeseen factors and challenges. Over the past few months, has Boeing taken any additional steps outside its safety and quality plan in response to any new information or new discoveries?
I can't give you specific examples. What I can say is that we have teams on the ground with Boeing, and they do give real-time feedback. So, for example, as they're simplifying business processes or rolling out a tool management program, they're getting real-time feedback from the FAA, and the approach and the plan is designed to be flexible to account for that feedback. So I would anticipate that the answer is yes, but I don't have specific examples to give you.
Do you know if at Boeing, if an employee sees what he thinks is a problem in manufacturing and safety, can he report that if he chooses or she chooses to the union so that the union can look into it and take it up to Boeing, or does he have to, is there requirements that it goes straight to Boeing and to the...
So the employee has multiple avenues. They can certainly go to their union, making sure that there is a system that encourages them to speak up directly to Boeing is in place. We're monitoring very closely. That is a key factor of a good safety culture. And they can also report directly to FAA through our website. They can log in and to Air 21 Whistleblower and file a complaint right on our website.
Changing Boeing's culture, systems, and processes will take time. What changes has the FAA seen so far in these areas, and which parts of the company have been the most resistant to any needed cultural changes?
I think the safety culture change is going to be a long-term project. They have put together a safety training program to roll out. That's been put on hold as union negotiations continue. That's ready to roll out, but I think it's going to take years of delivering that safety message and the employees actually seeing that safety is more important than production before that culture to change. So it's going to take a very long-term sustained commitment. The changes we've seen in the short term have been around deploying new technologies, assessing employee culture and things of that nature.
Did they ever ascertain who the individual was who didn't put the plugs back on the Alaska airplane?
That incident is still under investigation from the NTSB, so I don't have any additional information to provide at this time.
Thank you. And you've met with Mr. Ortberg, I know. Do you think he will lead the company differently from Mr. Calhoun and his predecessors, and if so, how?
Well, I think we've been very careful not to have opinions on personnel changes. There have been a lot of personnel changes, and I've spoken to the board fairly extensively about what we think management should be focused on. I've had those conversations with Mr. Ortberg, too. I think because he's an engineer, because he comes from aerospace, I think he has a pretty good understanding of the need for safety culture, and we'll make sure that he pursues that.
As I understand it, Boeing has purchased or taken back Spirit, and Boeing at one time had Spirit, separated it, brought it back. Do you think that's going to help? And do you think that the cause that that are spinning off Spirit, and some of the labor issues they might have had then might have contributed to it less than a perfect situation for the employees' diligence.
I do think that the amount of outsourcing that Boeing undertook strategically created a lot of supply chain challenges that other companies may not have experienced if they had more control over their supply chain. And Boeing seems to be taking a different direction in that approach. We've been agnostic about whether it's a good idea or a bad idea for them to execute that specific transaction. But if Spirit is part of Boeing, it gives us direct authority over Spirit. Currently, Boeing has a responsibility to oversee Spirit as a supplier. So it gives us a better line of sight into what they're doing.
Airbus is Boeing's major competitor. Embraer also produces a lot of airplanes. Do either one of them have different systems that Boeing could incorporate or needs to look at and incorporate? Because they have, to the best of my knowledge, have not had these similar problems.
I think I don't have intimate knowledge of the Embraer and Airbus manufacturing challenges. I know that as we benchmark airworthiness directives and faults and production faults, we find that there's not a big difference between the two. I think when you look at the key indicators we're monitoring, those would be the same for most manufacturing facilities.
Thank you, sir. In the spirit of George Miller and Sheila Jackson Lee, who always gave up their time when they didn't have any time, I give up the rest of my time.
Appreciate the generosity, Ranking Member Cohen. Gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry about that earlier. I was listening and changing up some of my questioning and thought pattern. And I want you to kind of go with me because I want to kind of set the stage, first of all. As it was stated earlier, culture starts at the top, and that's what shapes and forms the rest of the organization and where they're going. And I want you to think back through the entire Department of Transportation, the derailment of the railroad, the train, over and above, way above average on near misses at our airports, even parts falling off of planes. And I say that because the Department of Transportation under Pete Buttigieg has had a focus of not hiring qualified people and looking at qualified people, but pushing a social agenda or a DEI initiative to the point where people that are under this industry, this umbrella of the Department of Transportation, actually focus more on DEI initiatives instead of hiring qualified people to build planes or to operate railroads, waterways, whatever it is under the purview of the Department of Transportation. So I guess what I want to know on the Boeing side of this thing is, I know they've opened up to operators so that they can look at the 737. Have you seen any other thing that you're concerned with on that airplane?
Have I seen anything other than what we're addressing in the comprehensive plan? As I mentioned, this is a pretty intensive monitoring process. So we meet with their safety team weekly. The management team meets monthly, and I meet with the CEO quarterly. Anything that arises gets incorporated into the plan. So if anything new comes up, we look at those types of issues.
You know, safety. I've heard that numerous times, and we hadn't even been in the meeting here 30 minutes or so. So that's the focus. And I want to kind of look at one other quick thing before I'm finished. I know that the GAO, nonpartisan GAO, put out a report that they assessed 138 systems that y'all have. According to them, 51 or 37% are unsustainable. 54 or another 39% of them are potentially unsustainable. And that the FAA has been extremely slow to modernize the most critical and at-risk systems. Now, we're sitting here talking about Boeing, but you've also got a lot of things at risk in the FAA. And I'm just curious, where's our initiative and where's our push on that to get this fixed?
I think the FAA facilities have been somewhat famously underinvested in over the years. The centers, we have 21 centers that control high altitude aircraft. Those were designed to be a maximum life of 50 years. They're now on average between 60 and 70 years old. All these facilities need to be replaced and upgraded. It's a fairly heavy lift financially. We have requested $8 billion in next year's budget to begin working on some of that replacement. There's a huge backlog of sustainment and modernization, and right now, 90% of our budget for facilities goes on sustainment rather than new systems. So we have a lot of work to bring the system up to speed.
I would agree. And Mr. Chairman, I brought that up, and I want you to understand where I look at this thing. I go back to the focus of the Department of Transportation overall, and the focus is in the wrong area. Instead of us focusing on making sure that we have the safest planes and the safest waterways and railroads and airports and hiring qualified people to do that, this administration and that agency are focused on social agendas. And they don't have their focus on making sure that we keep people safe. And that, to me, is the bigger issue that we have underlying right here, right now. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Ms. Collins, I do want to apologize to you. You had 2 or 3 people that were in front of you, and they all jetted, and so I put you on the spot, and I apologize for that. But thank you for staying. Recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Larson from Washington, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think it's generally agreed that late 90s, early 2000s, Boeing began to shift from being an engineering company to a financial services company, focused on revenue for shareholder value instead of as primary, instead of safety as primary. I think our investigation showed that when we wrote the reform bill. It's been the conclusion, the consensus conclusion from a lot of folks. And what we need to, earlier I said, we need to move from thinking just about building the best airplanes in the world here in the United States. We need to build the safest airplanes here in the United States. And safety itself is a shareholder value, and that needs to be communicated to shareholders at Boeing as well. And they need to expect that from their leadership, and because that's what the workers expect as well. So that's, I think, very critical. And on these points, as you move forward in thinking about safety, the first question I wanted to ask you is about these key performance indicators, these KPIs, the 6 of them you've outlined, and how you would assess Boeing's progress generally on each of them. You don't need to go through all 6, but how you assess progress on these KPIs. They seem to be the linchpins that you're using to kind of turn Boeing on or off in terms of progress or moving backwards.
I think the KPIs cover the key elements of the plan, so they let us know how they're doing on what they need to do in the plan. So for example, we talked about traveled work. So if a fuselage leaves Spirit Aerospace in Kansas and goes to Seattle and it has a series of faults in it, those have to be reworked in an out-of-order sort of fashion. And I think that was implicated in the January 5th event. So, for example, we measure how much work is done out of work as one of those metrics. We are measuring how they're doing with their supply chain, whether they have other shortages, because supply chain shortages lead to out-of-order work in the process. How the employee proficiency is doing, and how much rework is done. So the things that you would expect, they've been trending in positive directions, mostly for the 737 line, and they've now been rolled out to other lines at Boeing. So these will be metrics in place for all the aircraft that they're building. And what we want to see is those metrics all be green and stable before there's growth in production.
And do those, have you concluded that those apply directly to building a safer airplane, and is this process getting incorporated into the safety management system and the quality management system?
They're all interrelated, and in fact, they are raising the types of issues you'd be looking for in a robust safety management system. So if you saw a lot of out-of-sequence work, you would identify that as a risk, and you would say, okay, what do we need to do to mitigate this risk? So we're sort of doing that process for them, or overseeing that process. But as the safety management system develops, if they're finding some other problem, they would identify that and mitigate the risk. We're now there with them to look at those potential problems.
So when we wrote the reform bill a couple years back, one of the things I'd emphasize is that people say, well, this is a Boeing bill. It's like, it's not a Boeing bill. This is an FAA bill. It's a aviation manufacturing bill. This applies to everybody that it applies to, not just, it applies to certainly Boeing as the source of the problem. But this gets to the bigger issue. I said we have two hearings really today. One is what's happening at Boeing. The other one's what's happening with you, FAA, overseeing an aviation manufacturing process to ensure that we have a safe aviation manufacturing process. So can you help us understand your comment about moving towards a proactive approach versus a reactive approach as you apply these principles to overseeing the manufacturing of the parts, components, and airframes that go into flying?
As we look at the oversight, we oversee half a dozen or so major actors in the safety system, if you will, the airlines, the manufacturers, repair stations, and the like, including the air traffic organization. For each of those, we want to have metrics that we can look to in real time to see how they're doing and how they're trending in the way that we do with airlines, with this index I referred to. So this KPI model likely will be a model that we use in OEMs to oversee how they're doing and give us a real-time idea of how things are trending that goes all the way up to the front office of the organization, so we have a better view into the health of the safety ecosystem.
Yeah. Thank you. You'll back, but I'll hang around if we get a second round there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ranking Member Larson. We now go to Senator Hawley. Oh, I'm sorry. Congressman Kiley from California, recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Administrator Whitaker. Thank you for being with us today. I appreciate your testimony and the thoroughness of your testimony regarding oversight of Boeing and the comprehensive plan. Obviously, there's been a great deal of public concern following the Flight 1282 incident, among others. And so I was hoping you could take a moment just to sort of speak directly to my constituents, folks across the country. What's the best assurance that you can provide people to give them confidence that these issues are being addressed and that the use of Boeing aircraft is safe?
So I think we're engaged in a very intensive oversight of Boeing. So we have people on the floor talking to the employees, watching the inspections take place. We have put a cap on production, so they can't increase production beyond what we feel like they can safely accomplish. When Boeing is ready to deliver an aircraft that they say is fully in compliance, we then do our own comprehensive review of that aircraft, and we write the airworthiness certificate ourselves. So we're giving a stamp of approval of every aircraft that's coming off the line. That is not the normal process that would be in place, so it's a much heightened level of scrutiny.
I appreciate that. Now, of course, Boeing's issues have also been in other areas, including most recently with regard to their space operations and the Starliner mission that wasn't able to return the astronauts from the International Space Station. And now NASA is relying on SpaceX to bring them home. And so, that sort of has put in sharp relief an issue that many have raised regarding perhaps the undue scrutiny that your agency is giving to SpaceX with a $633,000 fine for launches last year recently, and then recently as well, delaying the launch, the fifth mission for Starship, 2 months past what the license previously said. So I was hoping you could speak to that issue, and in particular, whether you think the delay of the Starship launch is in the public interest.
So I think safety is in the public interest, and that's our primary focus. With the proposed civil penalty, it involved a failure to comply with comply with the launch requirements before launching. They launched without a permit. The allegations are that they moved a fuel farm closer to the population and did not do a risk analysis before launching. It's the only tool we have to get compliance on safety matters. I think.
So how about this delay? Are you saying that the delay of Starship is for safety reasons?
The civil penalty matter wasn't delayed. They launched without a permit. The delay of the Starship had to do with SpaceX filing an application and not disclosing that they were in violation of Texas and federal law on some matters, and that's a requirement to get a permit.
So my question, though, is it a safety issue? Is that why it's being delayed?
I think it is. I think launching these rockets is a safety issue into the NAS, and I think it's a situation that requires the same level of safety management and safety culture that we're working to implement at Boeing needs to also exist with commercial space.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. I'm saying, are the reasons for this delay, which is moving the launch back from what was previously communicated, are the reasons for the delay safety related?
Well, the first reason of delay was that SpaceX failed to provide an updated sonic boom analysis, so there was a 30-day delay due to that. And then the latest delay was their failure to comply with Texas law, which is a prerequisite to getting a launch permit.
Okay, so assuming for the sake of argument that's true, but these are not safety-related reasons.
I think the sonic boom analysis is a safety-related incident.
You think the 2-month delay is necessary to assure a safe launch?
I think the 2-month delay is necessary to comply with the launch requirements, and I think that's an important part of safety culture.
I guess that my concern is, and we've heard this from former FAA officials, you've heard it from both sides of the aisle, that our leadership in the commercial space industry is absolutely vital to U.S. national security, our global leadership, and yet the FAA does not seem like it's operating in a way that is conducive with continued innovation, and that this is an issue where we could have resolved that whatever the issues you bring up are without delaying this entire launch by 2 months. Do you agree that the FAA needs to be reformed in a way that is better suited towards the type of innovation that we should be moving towards in the commercial space industry?
Well, I agree that this is a vital mission, and I think SpaceX has been a very innovative company, but I think they're also a mature company. They've been around 20 years, and I think they need to operate at the highest level of safety, and that includes adopting a SMS program, and it includes having a whistleblower program.
So is there any path to moving up that launch?
Complying with the regulations would be the best path.
I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Kiley. We have the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Stanton, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here, Administrator Whitaker, to discuss the FAA oversight on Boeing's action plan after the concerning events we all witnessed this past January. I would first like to ask about Boeing's safety management system, the enterprise-wide plan across their production system that includes streamlining employee reporting channels, addressing traveled work risk, and deepening the integration between safety and quality measures. Mr. Whitaker, Boeing committed to mature its SMS as part of its comprehensive action plan. However, Boeing originally committed to developing its SMS in 2015, again in 2019, and today, and it is still not fully developed. In fact, its current SMS has allowed multiple safety incidents, including the January 5th 737 MAX door plug accident, to continue to occur. What is the FAA doing to ensure Boeing fully develops its SMS as soon as possible, and how will the FAA ensure Boeing's SMS can avoid future production safety issues, including the circumstances leading up to the January 5th door plug accident?
Well, thank you for that. I think that's the key question in all of this, because I think a healthy SMS system is really the key to operating safely, and Boeing has failed to successfully implement in the past. I think the difference this time, there are a couple differences. One is the requirement to have SMS is now mandatory by law, so they have to comply with it in order to operate. And secondly, it is a key element of the comprehensive plan, and we're monitoring that very intensively going forward. And they will not be able to grow and increase production unless they're successful in meeting these safety challenges.
Has the FAA found an indication Boeing suppliers contributed to any of the safety lapses the FAA identified in its initial audit of the door plug accident?
So the actual investigation into the door plug incident is still ongoing, so I can't comment on that. But I think it's been well understood that the quality of products that was coming out of Spirit Aerosystems was not sufficient, and Boeing has shifted their inspectors down to Wichita to make sure that that traveled work problem gets resolved.
What is the agency doing to ensure the integrity of the U.S. aerospace supply chain?
So the supply chain is really a corporate decision that the OEMs are making. So some do a lot more in-house and some delegate. I think Boeing learned that there may have been too much delegation that led to some of those supply chain issues. But we are making sure that the OEMs are holding their suppliers to the highest levels of safety, and they're responsible for the quality of those products.
I want to switch gears here and ask you about an issue that's very important to the people of my constituency and Mesa and the East Valley part of Phoenix. I want to ask you about the Phoenix Mesa Gateway's air traffic control tower. Despite the fact that this is one of the fastest growing commercial airports in the country, staffing shortages have forced the airport to reduce operations in the tower. The FAA reauthorization included my provision directing the FAA to establish a pilot program to convert high-activity air traffic control towers operating under the contract tower program to FAA-staffed visual flight rule towers to alleviate issues like the one Mesa Gateway is facing. My office heard from the city of Mesa just last week that FAA officials had a great meeting with them to discuss next steps forward. Do you see any challenges with implementing this staffing solution by the 18-month deadline outlined in the reauthorization bill?
I also heard that there was a very productive meeting, so hopefully that means that we're on track and we'll work to make sure that we meet that deadline.
Do you, the agency, need anything else from us in Congress to keep this as an important priority?
Well, I would just say that our system is full of very old infrastructure, so we're constantly in need of upgrading the infrastructure. The bill funding for infrastructure, while extensive, only allowed us to upgrade about 10% of our infrastructure, so we still have a significant backlog in that space.
Okay, I just want you to know that that is a very important issue to the entire airspace issue in the Phoenix metropolitan region. It's obviously a former Air Force facility that can grow, and as number of flights are growing in and out of the region, it's a real opportunity. And one of the major limiting factors is having a contract tower, not it being an FAA tower. So we got it in the bill. Your support to make that happen is very much appreciated.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Denton. The gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Burchard, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Whitaker, Administrator Whitaker, excuse me. One of the big issues at Boeing is the breakdown in communication, the way I see it. I appreciate the Speak Up program, but how is Boeing improving communication between different teams to ensure quality control issues do not slip through the cracks?
Well, making sure that there's a robust program in place where the employees can speak up is a key component of the safety management system, and it's required for success. That's where you get your best information, is from the floor. So we're watching very diligently to make sure that that program is available and is being used. So we're doing surveys of employees and talking with folks on the ground. But employees have multiple pathways, including coming directly to FAA. If they don't feel like they can speak up at Boeing, they can come to our website and file information there as well.
How will folks be reviewed or responded to that do those kind of things?
So at FAA, we have a very regimented program to protect identity, and each claim gets investigated very thoroughly. And we're working to make sure that that same approach is taken at Boeing, so there's no retaliation. In fact, people should be recognized for speaking up, and we are seeing an uptick in reports over this course of this year.
Do we have any metrics that show that it's improved the operations through this new line of communications, or old line, I guess I should say?
I think the best metric is going to be employee surveys, and I can respond back to your office to see if we have any additional specific information about that.
Okay. Most of the folks up here, me included, are space exploration or rocketry skills. Basically, are 4th of July shooting some bottle rockets, or maybe have an Estes rocket that their dad helped make a very cool V2 that the first launch went into a huge oak tree in my neighbor's yard. It's still never been able to recover that. But I'm curious about those poor folks that seem to be trapped in outer space. Are they, I had a constituent, a lady, Denise Lambert, I believe was her name, had asked about those folks, and do we think they're going to get home safely and soon?
So it's a little bit outside my portfolio, my oversight.
I realize that, but that's
yeah.
That's kind of what everybody's talking about.
Well, all I can say is I hope so.
Well, that's a very graded answer, I'll say. Thank you. Another area of concern, of course, is the employee training. specifically employees' adherence to work instructions. In the comprehensive action plan, they committed to simplifying work instructions for mechanics and inspectors so that they'll be able to perform checks in a consistent manner. Now, to your knowledge, has Boeing revised any of the pre-existing instructions manuals yet?
So my understanding is they've completed an assessment of the work instructions to identify the areas where they need to simplify the instructions. So that process has been underway. How many have actually been simplified at this point, I don't know, but I do know that there's been progress in that space.
Do you think that simplifying the processes and procedures helps increase consistency during that process?
It helps increase consistency, it reduces confusion and conflict, and it needs to correspond with more training as well.
Did y'all consider the stakeholder and the FAA's feedback when you developed those simplified processes and procedures?
Can you say that again?
Did you consider, sorry, I'm from East Tennessee. It's the only place in America where people don't speak with an accent, so I guess I can understand you not getting that. Did Boeing consider stakeholder and Federal Aviation Administration feedback when developing simplified processes and procedures?
They did. They had the results of our own audit. They had the results of the Section 103 panel that was put together, and also employee feedback directly.
What about the FAA? Have they changed their approach to oversight of industry compliance?
We've changed our oversight to Boeing extensively by having inspectors on the floor, by putting this cap on production, by having these metrics that we're monitoring, and then we're looking more broadly at the oversight models for all segments of aviation, including OEMs.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, since I'm a generous soul, I'm going to yield back the remainder 20 seconds of my time.
Thank you. Gentleman from Tennessee, were you trying to draw a connection between the rocket that got stuck in the oak tree and otherwise it would have reached the International Space Station? Is that what you
I was actually making the point that that's about my knowledge, and I realize that's about everybody up here's knowledge, and they've all Googled some really cool stuff on this, I'm sure, but the reality is that's about as far as it goes, Mr. Chairman. Sorry to deflate everybody's ego on both sides of the aisle.
Nope.
But if you know how to get that thing out of that oak tree, I'll be with you. My brother climbed up there years ago, and he never could quite make it to the top. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for pointing out something very important to me.
Yeah. We'll get the full resources at the Transportation Committee on that. Thank you. The gentlelady from Nevada, Ms. Titus, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Administrator. Before I ask you about Boeing, I want to switch topics for just a minute. You know, Section 502 of the FAA reauthorization bill authorized 10 new slot exemptions at DCA for service to domestic airports, either within or beyond the 1,250-mile perimeter. That decision was supposed to have been made last month. There was a 60-day deadline. I know it's not right on you, but I'm asking you if you would talk to the secretary and see if you can get us some idea of what's happening with that, or if it's coming soon, or if there's a problem.
Thank you, ma'am. As you say, it's a DOT process that's been running, and I know they've received a lot of comments in that process, and they are certainly adjudicating those comments. But I will certainly take that up.
Thank you. You know, Reed International Airport's in my district, and the air traffic is just increasing by leaps and bounds. I think we welcomed 57.6 million passengers last year, and that shattered the previous record by 5 million. So what's happening in the airspace is really important to our economy, and concern about the safety and efficiency and all of that. So I appreciate what you're doing. I would like to ask you, though, about Section 430 of the FAA reauthorization bill, and that requires y'all to update aviation safety inspector model within 2 years so you can have a better idea of the workforce. During a recent Senate hearing, you testified that FAA had deployed 24 inspectors to Boeing, and your target was 55 inspectors. And then in your testimony today, you mentioned that you have added some more safety inspectors at Boeing and at Spirit. I wonder just how many you have added and what you've been doing to recruit, hire, and train these new inspectors.
So the goal is to have 55 inspectors deployed at the Boeing and Spirit facilities by the end of the year. We're on track to do that. I don't know our exact number today. I think it's in the 40s. We've been able to hire fairly experienced inspectors, on average with 20 years experience, and we've also brought some inspectors in from other areas of FAA. We have a training program at Oklahoma City that we put new inspectors through and then on-the-job training. So we have been able to find good inspectors and experienced inspectors to deploy onto this project.
So you're optimistic that you're going to meet that goal?
Yes, ma'am.
That's good to hear. Another question, since the Alaska Airlines incident in January, it's become real apparent, and we've heard about it here today, that there was a need for cultural change at Boeing when it came to safety. It should have been the priority, but it kind of slid a bit. The new CEO, Mr. Ortberg, is an engineer. Are you confident that this change at the executive level will foster a change in that culture and help to kind of move Boeing back in the direction where it should be?
Well, as you indicated, Mr. Ortberg's an engineer with an aerospace background, but I'm not necessarily placing my confidence in that solving all problems, so we're going to continue our intensive oversight. I've had a couple of conversations with Mr. Ortberg, and he understands our focus on that long-term project to change the safety, and we'll stay very engaged to make sure that happens.
The Boeing Comprehensive Action Plan seems to be a step in the right direction, I've heard you say. But I want to know how the FAA is going to enforce oversight if they should fall short of their key performance indicators.
Well, I think the key difference now between previous challenges with Boeing is that we have put a production cap in place. And in order for Boeing to meet any of its other financial objectives, it's going to have to get past those production levels, which means it has to operate safely. It has to have a robust safety risk assessment system, and we're going to stay very intensely engaged with them as they go on that journey.
And what are the consequences if they don't meet those requirements?
Well, the consequences are they can't increase production from our perspective.
So
we're not really focused on what the financial outcomes are, but we're really just focused on making sure that those indicators are green, they're stable, and if they're going to grow, they have a plan for how to keep those indicators green.
Okay, well, thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Titus. Gentleman from California, Ms. Carbajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Whitaker, Boeing has made multiple commitments to the FAA to strengthen certain safety practices in exchange for deferring civil penalties or other enforcement actions. This includes settlement agreements made in 2015, 2021, 2024 with the FAA and the Department of Justice to, among other things, enhance its safety compliance programs. Despite these agreements, Boeing has continued to experience multiple safety issues. Has the FAA seen any progress in FAA safety compliance programs as a result of these settlements?
So I've been quite focused on, since I joined 11 months ago, I've been very focused on the events of January 5th, which happened 10 weeks into my tenure. I have done a little research into some previous efforts, so I am aware that there have been challenges before. That's really one reason why we've taken a different approach in a couple key ways. One is that production cap, which really gives us the leverage we need to make sure these changes happen, but also getting these key performance indicators so we have a real-time view on how things are going on the floor, on the production line, and then also having direct contact with employees to understand what's happening on the safety culture. So those are I think, make a different situation than there was before.
Thank you. Mr. Whitaker, whistleblowers have been an important part of the investigation process. Since the January 5th accident, we have been tracking a significant increase in employee concerns. What is the FAA doing to ensure that any whistleblower complaints are properly vetted in a timely manner? And has this increase in quantity resulted in any processing delays?
So we have had an increase in quantity. We have a very regimented program at the FAA. So these complaints are immediately examined for safety of flight concerns and analyzed to see if there's immediate action taken. And then they're assigned to the relevant group that oversees that particular subject matter area. We also work to protect the identity of the whistleblower, and then ultimately respond to that whistleblower with an outcome after the investigation.
What steps have you taken to safeguard the employees from retaliation, which is a natural thing that happens in many of these environments?
So any allegations of retaliation that we receive, we refer to the Department of Labor, which has jurisdiction over that aspect of employment in the country. So they follow those matters through their own processes.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Carbajal. Actually, you're not here. Recognize Mr. Johnson from Georgia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Administrator Whitaker, for sharing your insights with us today. The aviation industry is not just dealing with isolated technical failures. We are confronting a troubling pattern. Incident after incident has revealed a culture of compromised safety, diminished trust, and inefficiency. When passengers board a plane, they place their trust in us to ensure their safety from takeoff to landing. Likewise, over 1 million aviation workers rely on a safe environment to do their jobs. Yet, tragically, that trust is eroding. Last month's Boeing tire explosion in Georgia is a stark reminder of our shared responsibility and the urgent need for reform. The message is clear. Safety cannot be rushed. As the FAA has made clear, restoring public confidence in our air travel must be our top priority. We need a firm commitment to empower regulatory bodies like the FAA with the resources and authority to hold companies accountable. Safety protocols must never be optional or negotiable. Administrator Whitaker, in your testimony, you mentioned the FAA has increased the number of safety inspectors at Boeing and Spirit Aerosystems facilities in response to systemic production quality issues. Does the FAA have the capacity to sustain this increased oversight, and are there any plans to expand it further?
Thank you, sir. We do have the capacity to maintain this level of oversight, and we intend to maintain this level of oversight indefinitely, certainly till we see the culture change and SMS deployment that is expected, and that's probably measured in years. So we're in it for the long term. We will continue to assess as we go along if we have additional need for additional inspectors, and then we'll either reallocate resources or come back to you and ask for more.
All right, in your testimony, you emphasized the FAA's commitment to safety and the need for increased oversight and accountability following safety incidents like the Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 incident. Do you foresee a need for increased resources and authorities at this time in order to effectively implement the comprehensive action plan for Boeing to ensure continuous oversight of its manufacturing processes?
I believe we have the resources that we need to carry out this oversight with Boeing, and as we continue to review our other oversight models in the system, we'll keep this committee informed on whether there are additional needs for resources or whether we need to reallocate resources between groups.
Thank you. In your testimony, you mentioned how the FAA has capped the production of Boeing 737 MAX airplanes to achieve system stability and compliance with quality control procedures. Can you explain what FAA means by system stability and how it would measure system stability, and at what point production can be safely ramped up again?
So one example of system stability is measuring whether the work is done in the proper sequence. As an aircraft moves through the production line, there are specific tasks at specific stations. If those are done out of order, it creates a risk that there will be some mistake in that work, or that you'll have to disassemble some other part to do an assembly that should have happened earlier in the process. So that's an example of a metric that we look at very closely to make sure the proper order of assembly is completed, and that gives us a sense of whether there's stability in the system.
Thank you. Boeing's new CEO, Kelly Ortberg, has emphasized the importance of safety culture reforms. How will the FAA monitor and verify these cultural shifts within Boeing over the long term, and what measures will be implemented to ensure that employees feel safe coming forward with their concerns?
I think the key metric in that is going to be employee surveys, and we'll be looking at the employee surveys that Boeing completes and then completing our own level of assessment of employee surveys. I think that's the best way of understanding whether the safety culture is taking. We'll also be looking at the number of whistleblower complaints and how people are, whether they're feeling free to speak up.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Garcia, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, Ranking Member, and Director, Administrator Whitaker, for being here today. This past July, Boeing announced that it intends to reacquire Spirit AeroSystems, one of its major suppliers and manufacturing partners. And they previously had sold Spirit in 2009 as part of a decision to cut costs. Although reacquiring Spirit would simplify manufacturing processes and could help reduce errors, the missing bolts that caused the door plug incident were removed at a Boeing facility, not Spirit AeroSystems. Given that the FAA's quality control audit of Boeing discovered 97 instances of noncompliance, why should we be confident that Boeing has the capacity to manage the extra manufacturing responsibilities?
So the manufacturer, of course, makes decisions about supply chain policy and strategy, and Boeing is making the decision that it can exercise more control over Spirit if it acquires it. We don't have an opinion on whether that's a good idea or a bad idea. We just need to make sure that they are exercising that control. They have made quite a few changes in the process already to make sure fewer defects are coming out of the Spirit Aerospace by moving inspectors down to that facility. But our main focus is whether they're getting products that are complying with the type design. So whether that's through direct ownership or other means of oversight is really a corporate decision.
Thank you, Administrator. And as a follow-up to that, what is the FAA doing to ensure that if this acquisition goes through, that Boeing has the protocols in place to implement the strong safety standards?
Well, we'll continue to look at the oversight that they're exercising directly if they acquire Spirit. We currently have 5 inspectors at Spirit, but if this acquisition goes through, then we'll also have direct regulatory authority over Spirit. So we'll be able to have direct inspections and oversight of their operations.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to focus on worker experience and the factors that play into Boeing's culture of safety. One of the items that Boeing outlines in its action plan is to improve the employee reporting channel called Speak Up. It's crucial that employees feel empowered to report safety concerns at any point in the production process, something that's been lacking up until now. Boeing has a documented history of prioritizing a high production volume and profits over safety. It also has a history of ignoring and retaliating, against employees who report concerns. Former engineers of the company have testified before Congress describing how reporting safety concerns has been met with hostility. Boeing's action plan says it aims to improve reporting by creating, quote, a more user-friendly reporting interface and increasing promotion of the benefits of reporting. This doesn't sound that convincing of an attempt to change a deeply dysfunctional culture. Can you elaborate on Boeing's plans to address employee reporting? And does the FAA plan to conduct oversight on this action?
We do plan to conduct oversight. In fact, the willingness of employees to speak up and identify safety concerns is really one of the key sources of safety information for a safety management system. Safety management systems are designed to find risk, and then the company needs to mitigate those risks, and employees are a great source of information. Boeing knows that this is a priority. We are monitoring their deployment of the system, and we will continue to engage with employees and watch to see the level of reporting that results.
And are you optimistic that there will be culture change as it relates to safety practices?
There has to be culture change. They won't be able to go back to producing aircraft at the level they want without that culture change.
Thank you, Administrator, for your time, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Gentlelady from Michigan, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Administrator Whitaker, for joining us again here today. We really appreciate your time. I really want to echo the sentiments that our ranking member said as well. You know, we really do feel that there are two hearings going on today, one about Boeing, but one about the overall job that the FAA is doing, particularly on the air maintenance and technician staffing that we currently have. Obviously, a critical shortage that impacts many aspects of overall aviation safety. Can you speak to the progress that Boeing is making as they implement its action plan for increased mechanic and technician training goals, as well as overall boosting public trust on this particular issue? You know, there's only so much that good internal policies can do if we're not externally communicating them and making sure the public is aware of it. That provides a critical oversight layer as well. And then a subpart of that is, you know, what more broadly is the FAA doing to ensure a broad and ready workforce here?
So 3 questions there. And I'll start by, I think the maintenance and training has been a challenge for Boeing. It's been a challenge throughout the industry after COVID because of all the retirements and the loss of, I think, a natural transfer of knowledge from generation to generation. The best companies recognize that as a safety risk with their safety management program, and they mitigate those risks by putting in extra training, bringing back retired employees to do mentoring, those types of things. Boeing recognizes that was a problem. The level of experience they're getting in their hiring is much lower than it used to be, so they are now increasing that training. And part of the comprehensive plan was assessing those training levels and deploying more training, and that is underway. I think as far as the public trust is concerned, I think the most important thing is that we hold Boeing to all of the elements of this comprehensive plan and see progress on that safety culture change and continue to deliver over the years. And it's probably a little bit of a long-term project to rebuild that trust, but I think it'll flow naturally out of having that safety culture and continuing to improve their operations. From our perspective, we are also recruiting from the same pool of potential aviation employers. We have worked very hard to increase the size of that pool, and including programs where we work in elementary schools and high schools to get younger students interested in the career field. It is very competitive, and we have quite a few initiatives underway to generate interest among younger generation to join this field.
Well, I would encourage you as well to continue to seek ways that you can get that information out into the public. I actually disagree that it flows naturally while making the internal changes is the most important thing. You know, the safety concerns that have been raised by high-profile incidences in the last several years permeate into the public conscience and really hurt the industry. It's important for the public to know and for the FAA to proactively communicate about those things so that the public can know what they can count on, the measures that are being taken, and so that they can play an important role in that critical oversight as well.
Yes.
I want to move on to one other quick question. The Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 incident was, of course, unacceptable and tragic. Fortunately, thanks to coordination between pilot and air traffic control, no one was harmed during the emergency. Air traffic control towers are paramount to everyday flight operations, protecting safety and efficiency of our national airspace system. You know that I have been a huge champion of replacing our air traffic control tower, one of the oldest FAA-owned air traffic control towers in the entire country at 60 years old. It is the oldest among the top 75 busiest airports in the entire country. This tower is out of compliance with safety and ADA regulations, raising serious safety concerns for West Michiganders. I am thankful that we've had several productive conversations, but we're ready to move into the action phase. So on behalf of all Michiganders, does the FAA have any updates that it can give to us today on how it can address these critical concerns with GRR's air traffic control tower so that the airport can best be equipped to respond to emergencies in the, God forbid, event that they might occur?
So we can certainly respond directly to your office on any updates that we may have, but I think it raises a very important point that our infrastructure is in need of significant investment across the board. And the 25 budget that was presented includes $8 billion to continue the infrastructure upgrading that happened under Bill, and there's a lot more to do.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for the additional time. Yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Shelton. The gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Oshkosh, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Welcome back, Administrator.
Thank you.
When you last came here, it was more informal roundtable discussion. I asked you about FAA investigations into the 2 runway near misses that had occurred. Both of those flights, one was at Logan, I believe, and one was en route from DCA to Logan. So they affect my constituents in Massachusetts. You assured me of a swift, certain, and comprehensive investigation. What is the status of those investigations?
I'm happy to respond to your office with any specifics around those particular investigations. I don't have that information with me right here.
Do you know, have they concluded at this point?
They would normally have been concluded by this point, yes.
Okay, so we would like to see the results of that investigation and any remedial actions that are being taken. Similar note, can you talk about the implementation of increased hiring for new air traffic controllers now that we've passed the FAA reauthorization and the new statute behind that? How is that going, and how is the relationship with the air traffic controllers evolving? I know there was some friction with the New York issue. Give us an update on the ATCs.
I think we have a strong relationship. I was at the Air Traffic Controller Safety Conference last week speaking, so I think it's a good relationship. The hiring process has been fairly intensive. We've really looked at every possible knob that we can turn to increase the field of qualified hires. Last year's objective was 1,650 hires. This year it was 1,800. We announced yesterday that we have exceeded that slightly for this year. Next year the goal will be 2,000. And that'll be a heavy lift. We're continuing to expand capacity at the academy. We're also working with the CTI schools to develop an enhanced CTI program that allows the CTI schools, if they have the proper equipment and the proper curriculum, to train air traffic controllers. So all they have to do is take the aptitude test and then be hired right into the facilities. Now there's a long lead time on that. This will be the first academic year that we hope to have some students. It'll probably be another year before we start to see more output. We've also made it easier for military controllers to be hired in upon retirement. So it used to be a twice-a-year event. Now it's a rolling event, so your retirement date doesn't matter. So we've really kind of looked under every rock to try to make the system better. I think this year the focus is going to be making the actual processing part more efficient. It involves medical, background check, all these other steps that folks have to go through, so try to make that process easier.
Understood. And of course, recruitment is important, but also so is retention, particularly of your experienced ATCs, and that requires engagement and solicitation from the air traffic controllers about their quality of life concerns, their scheduling concerns, their safety concerns. So I just encourage you to
in that regard, we've implemented new fatigue rules that just were rolled out this year that will make sure that we're having adequate rest between shifts. So I think that's going to be not only a safety enhancement, but a quality of life improvement as well.
Yeah, Logan is one of the more challenging airports for the air traffic controllers. We've got an old tower
Yep,
as
I've
well. And
visited that, yep.
Those women and men work hard and they work in pretty tough conditions, and we need to ensure that they're set up for success in their safety mission.
I would actually identify the Logan Tower as of an example of our underinvestment
Yes,
in the
I
system.
would agree.
We haven't been able to deploy Datacom in Boston because there's no physical space in that tower for the computer rooms
Yes.
with adequate air conditioning and cooling. So it's an example of how that old infrastructure is really hampering modernization.
Final question for you. Does the FAA have any scope or opinion on the decision by some American airlines to cease flights into Israel? I believe Delta and United have stopped flying. Is that an area that they check in with the FAA on, or is that a unilateral decision that they make?
That would be an airline decision. The role of FAA really is around NOTAMs and safety of flight, that type of issue. So we do communicate with, particularly in this instance, which is constantly changing in real time, and we provide guidance on NOTAMs and safety.
Do you have guidance from the FAA on the safety of flying into Tel Aviv or Jerusalem?
I think at this point, we're mirroring the NOTAMs that are put in place by Israel for where you can fly and don't fly. So we don't provide anything beyond that, but we do have, for the carriers that fly to that region, usually they have a classified status, so we can give them intel briefings when they make their decisions.
Okay. Yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady from District of Columbia, Ms. Norton's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As co-chair of the Quiet Skies Caucus and the member who represents the District of Columbia, which is plagued by airplane and helicopter noise, I urge the FAA to do more to combat aviation noise and to engage more with affected communities on this matter. If the FAA needs additional authority or resources to combat aviation noise, I urge the FAA to inform this committee of what it needs. Mr. Whitaker, safety must be the FAA's top priority. Should the American public have confidence that it is safe to fly on Boeing airplanes?
They should. We write the airworthiness certificate for each aircraft that comes off the line. We have inspectors that are on the floor every day overseeing the process, talking with employees. We're monitoring the health of the production facility, and we do our own inspection of the aircraft before they get their airworthiness certificate. So they can be confident that the aircraft are safe.
I appreciate that. In its comprehensive action plan, Boeing committed to encouraging its employees to report safety concerns. What assurances can the FAA offer that Boeing will not retaliate against employees for reporting safety concerns?
Well, this is something that we monitor closely because the ability of employees to speak up is a key component of a healthy safety management system and a healthy safety culture. So we will watch that closely. We talk to employees directly. We look at employee surveys and culture surveys. And if there are any claims of retaliation, we refer to those to the Department of Labor for investigation.
In its comprehensive action plan, Boeing committed, I guess I asked that question. I'm sorry. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Gentleman from California, Mr. DeSolier, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Graves. Administrator, sorry, allergies is another problem. First of all, thank you for the work you've done so far in very challenging times. Last time we spoke at the roundtable, we talked a little bit about the challenges changing a culture. We've found out a lot since you've been there, including the story today in the New York Times about the GAO's report, just confirming a lot of the things we already knew. But my question was consistent with our previous conversation, if you remember, when you brought up General Electric. In that conversation, my memory is there's just been a story about Boeing that it used to be an engineering company. and it had changed, which is an example of a cultural change in multiple things. We've got a lot of research on the pharmaceutical industry. Used to be that people were researchers and they were chemists and biologists, and then the chief financial officer became the CEO. Nothing wrong with that, but in the challenge for you in this culture where safety is such a premium for long-term investment, whether it's Boeing or the airlines or any other subcontractor, there's so much pressure to get return on investment under the Supreme Court's decision that for publicly traded company, your number one liability is the Better Business Plan, which means return on investment. So here's an industry that is sort of a utility in an old-fashioned way where it's a public-private partnership, and the EU looks at that way, and Japan looks at it this way, but because of the investment community, starting with Carl Icahn, I mean, it's sort of a canary in the coal mine when you look back at this period, balancing that responsibility given these other moving parts and regulatory and judicial decisions and congressional decisions, getting Boeing to becoming an engineering company where the investors value that for long-term and short-term investments. How do you view that when you've got the inspectors on the ground, you've got risk assessments, they're worried about liability. Certainly the air carriers are worried about that one big incident that will crater return on investment, which is where I started in the near miss at SFO. So talk to me a little bit about that challenge. You have very specific regulatory administrative authority in a world where there's lots of different pressures.
Well, it's an interesting observation, and I think I would say that even if profits were your number one goal, safety really needs to be your number one goal because it's hard to be profitable if you're not safe. And I think Boeing certainly has learned that. Whatever money might have been saved has certainly been lost in the fallout. So regardless of what your other objectives are, if you don't start with safety, your chances of succeeding are very poor, whether you're an airline or a manufacturer. So that's what we're looking at, is just to see that there's a real safety culture, not just safety's first as a slogan, but a real safety culture that permeates everything that's done and comes first before production goals or operational goals or mission goals or financial goals. So that's really our focus.
So just to follow up on that, on the risk assessment, and I'm not complaining about return on investment, it's just a reasonable rate of return for long term. And so companies constantly do risk assessment. Boeing has done it. To the ranking member's earlier questions about risk assessment, but risk assessment when these competing interests. So right now, my sense is that Boeing and the industries generally realize, okay, the spotlight's on us. We've got to let our investment community, but in a world where investors are instantaneously mobile and could go to a higher rate of return with, they're looking for lower risks, therein lies, I think, one of the real challenges to get this as a sustainable safety culture for as long as possible for all of the stakeholders, the flying public in particular. I get it. I understand right now the spotlight's on them. But if we start moving back to quarterly returns and pressures, and they're legitimate concerns, these are the challenges that we are partners to.
Yeah, and I think our oversight model of Boeing has certainly changed dramatically this year. So we've moved from an audit approach to much more of a boots-on-the-ground inspection approach. We've got these key performance indicators that we monitor on a weekly basis so we can see exactly what's happening in the system. And of course, we have a cap in place on production. So we feel like we have the tools to monitor this carefully and closely. And I think this is a model for how we should be monitoring the safety of the NAS.
Thank you. You got my mind started on when you made the Jack Welch observation.
Thanks.
Thank you. Gentleman from South Dakota, Mr. Johnson, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Administrator, obviously there's been a lot of public attention paid to the challenges Boeing has faced, as well as the FAA's role in all of that. What do you think is the most commonly misunderstood aspect of what's going on between the FAA and Boeing?
Well, I think the comprehensive plan, as we've talked about with Boeing, includes some very short-term changes, but the ultimate mission is very long-term. So we're sort of balancing these two short-term, the short-term and the long-term. Short-term is employee training, it's cutting down on traveled work, it's deploying tool tracking technology, part tracking technology. These things are happening and they're making progress. Long-term is a years-long process to really change that safety culture, let the employees feel like it's really changed and start to see that evidence.
So, yeah, let's continue to talk about culture. I thought my colleague immediately prior did a good job of trying to tease out some of the culture issues. Clearly, there are some short-term issues that I think are complicating your long-term push. I mean, we've got machinists striking at Boeing. That I assume that's an impediment to some of the culture change?
Well, the strike stops some of the work that's going on. So some of the pilot programs to deploy new technology, some of the training certainly is stopping. And we're monitoring that situation closely. So when and if workers go back to work, we'll assess how much additional training might be needed. So it does interrupt this process, but the plan itself will still need to be deployed.
And then we talked a little bit about new CEO Ortberg being on the job for less than a month, or about a month. I'm not really asking about the top spot. Clearly, a CEO is incredibly important as a culture officer, but we also know that culture is way more than just one person. What's your assessment about the next 2 or 3 rungs of top management? I mean, has the wake-up call been sufficient enough for them to understand the magnitude of the change that is needed?
Well, I've had several conversations with various board members around the need for a long-term plan on safety and what needs to happen, what the primary focus ought to be. They've made some changes at the board level. Obviously, the CEO changes have been made, and there have been changes in that next layer of management as well. I can't sort of grade each official in that realm. We're really just focused on performance and making sure that they're actually executing the plan and monitoring that very closely. So we have weekly meetings on the floor, we have monthly meetings of the safety leaders, and then quarterly meetings with the CEO and that senior team. And these are day-long, roll up your sleeves, go through 8 hours of PowerPoints and tours kind of meetings to get a sense of how this is going. So we're evaluating that at every level.
You talk about the need to pursue both some short-term objectives as well as the longer-term mission. What is the most concerning threat in your mind toward actually accomplishing the long-term goal?
Sustaining the momentum. And I think this can't be viewed as a 9 or 12-month project. Year by year, you have to have the message has to be safety, the communications have to be safety, and then the employees have to see it in action. If something's wrong, an employee says something, the reaction has to be, okay, let's assess this safety risk and do what we need to, not hurry up and get back to work. So I think on the floor, they're going to be able to detect whether it's happening.
You want a heightened urgency, a focused attention day in and day out. You talked about these extended meetings, working through PowerPoints. How do you gauge in these conversations whether or not real progress is being made?
Well, those conversations don't necessarily tell us the real progress. We do surveys of employees. We have our folks on the ground talking to employees so we can gauge how they're feeling about speaking up, whether they're seeing something change. And the inspectors on the floor are able to understand what the communications are that are coming out. Is it about production? Is it about hurry up? Or is it about safety and training and that type of thing? So we're assessing it at all levels.
Very good. Thank you much. Sir, I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Drew is recognized. And Drew is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Whitaker, thank you for being here. I have a very brief statement first before I have some questions. For 2 decades, as we know, Boeing has been promoted unqualified managers who've made disastrous decisions like outsourcing America's supply chains. And this has happened, quite frankly, in government. It's happened in corporate America. It has happened at just about every level of our society. The best way to create opportunity for those who don't have it is not by lowering standards. It is by increasing education for them. It is by increasing focus. It is by increasing energy and meritocracy. And And I hope as we go forward, because Boeing is a very physical sign of what has happened, and it's a bigger issue than just even Boeing. It's something that is running through our country right now, and it's serious. And if we want to be number one in the world, which is my goal always for the United States of America, we need to change the way we're going about business. We need to help people to give them opportunity, but they need to be able to rise to the occasion, and we need to help them to do that, not to lower the standards, not to put people in jobs in which they're not qualified. You know, in July, so that's my statement. In July, I sent you a letter on the FAA reauthorization. As you know, we heard from your office actually this morning, which I now submit for the record. This letter includes an invitation for you to come. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. This letter includes an invitation for you to come to South Jersey and meet with many of our aviation stakeholders. Can you confirm, and I know that you did this morning, that you have received the letter and the invitation?
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Me too. Me too. It'll be good to have you in South Jersey. I've received several questions about the FAA reauth and the technical center, and I provided this to your team. We tried to provide you in advance, not to blindside you, out of respect for you and out of respect for the issues. Under the new FAA law, the Next Gen Office will become the Airspace Modernization Office. The Airspace Modernization Office cannot succeed without control of program management functions related to technology integration. Does the FAA plan on reorganizing the Program Management Office as a component of the Airspace Modernization Act?
Thank you, sir. First, I'll mention, when I was deputy, I had the opportunity to visit the Tech Center several times, and I actually visited it very early in this tenure, but I look forward to coming there to visit, and I think it's not only a national treasure, but it's international standards for airspace research in this space. So looking forward to that. The reauth, I will say that we are, and this was mentioned several times in opening comments, we are treating the provisions of reauth as a program that we have program management protocols around. So we're tracking all of the various items. With respect to the reorganization of NextGen, there's a working group that's looking at best practices, talking to all the teams within FAA, and we'll come up with a plan on how to reorganize that, and I'll keep you informed on that.
Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. And I know the answers are short, and we'll have a lot more time to speak when you come down to South Jersey, but I just have a few more, and I appreciate the brief answers. The FAA codified the FAA Technical Center in statute. The statute means that the Technical Center, as you know, is now legally protected from predatory organizations or reorganizations, that it is locally controlled, and that it is the FAA's undisputed leader in technology, research, testing, and validation. And again, quick answer, can you assure me that attempts to dismantle the Tech Center are finally over, and that going forward, the center will be provided the necessary programs, resources, and authority to execute this new and important mission?
I can assure you I agree with those provisions, and we'll uphold that. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Congress is preparing historic infrastructure investments for the Tech Center, but we must invest more into programs such as the Emerging Technologies Accelerator, which you're familiar with. This program would empower the Tech Center to solicit partnerships and develop innovative improvements for our aviation system. Can we work together? Can we work together and get the Emerging Technologies Accelerator in the fiscal 2026 FAA budget request? Can we do that?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Section 961 of the FAA law established a Center for Advanced Aviation Technologies. I want to be unequivocal that under the Technical Center statute, overall management of this program legally falls under the center's jurisdiction. Is the FAA considering the Technical Center's new statutory authority in designing this very program?
We'll certainly consider that authority, and there's a team working on what that advanced center would look like, so we'll keep you informed on that as well.
You will. We would love to have that communication. South Jersey is prepared to absorb the responsibility. They are. They're ready to go. I am already working with the United States Air Force on a drone testing corridor in New Jersey, as you know. However, I don't think this program should be limited to a single test range in a single region. Is the FAA amenable to a program with multiple national test ranges that are programmatically managed out of the FAA Tech Center? My last question.
Administrator, if you could be brief, and if you'd like to follow up in writing.
I'm sorry.
Brief answer, and then we're done.
Yes, no, that's still being looked at, but we'll certainly keep you informed on how that plan gets put together.
Please work with our office on that. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your discretion. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Van Drew. Administrator, I want to say thanks again for being here and appreciate your endurance. I do have a few questions, and we also want to go a quick round two. Ranking Member Larson has a few follow-ups. First of all, soon we're going to have 2,000 aircraft parts manufacturers and Part 135 operators that are going to be required to have an SMS. But it's also important to keep in mind that from 2015 to the current, you've had the requirement that Part 121 operators already have an SMS.
Yes.
But that still resulted in us having safety issues and some of the incidents that we're here talking about today. In my opinion, and I've heard lots of questions on the SMS that have occurred here today, the SMS is only as valuable as, number one, the SMS plan is, meaning is it truly applicable and sensitive to the safety threats that may occur in the manufacturing process. And number two, the actual execution and oversight of that SMS. And so you probably see where I'm going. If an SMS system has been required for 121 operators and we've had problems, are we supposed to feel confident that all of these new operators, hundreds of new operators coming online, operating under Part 135, that's actually going to solve problems in regard to safety? Can you explain to me how this is going to be different and give me some comfort that moving forward, that the development of SMS plans and the actual execution and oversight is going to result in the types of outcomes that I know you and I share in regard to safety?
So I think the rollout of SMS with 121 carriers has been quite successful. And we see that in action as they identify risks. We hear about risks from them directly. They're mitigating those risks. It certainly takes some time, I think, for companies to embrace. SMS can sound like an administrative burden until you really understand the value that it can contribute in keeping you safe. One of the things that we saw with Boeing, which clearly did not take its 2015 mandate to have an SMS system seriously enough, we found that after the events of January 5th, that we consciously put Boeing together with some of the carriers and said, go talk to them. They've been deploying this for a long time. And Boeing has met with UPS and some of the other carriers to talk about their SMS and customize it to their own operation. So, and it's not a one-size-fits all. We know some of these 135 operators are quite small, so we need to make sure we have a streamlined approach so they're not burdened by that process. But it is a very effective risk management system, and that's what we need, is every operator constantly evaluating their risk and then taking steps to mitigate it. That's really the thing that keeps us safe.
Thank you. In my opening, I mentioned the 2020 law that I know Mr. Larson and other leadership of the committee felt was appropriate action, Aircraft Certification, Safety, and Accountability Act, ACSA. Here we are 4 years later, and as you know, major components of that legislation remain unaddressed or not fully implemented. Can you tell me how many provisions, do you know how many provisions of that are not implemented? And give me an idea on the implementation plan when we're going to have a 4-year-old law fully implemented?
So my understanding is that we're about 75% implemented on that, and we can provide your office with some more detail about where that implementation is. It was a very comprehensive and I think very helpful plan, and we're continuing to not just rest on the designs from that plan, but to also look at our oversight model more holistically going forward as well.
Administrator Hunter told me if I said something about walking and chewing gum again that he was gonna lash me. But look, I will tell you, I think I can speak on behalf of Mr. Larson and all of us. No one expected it was going to take 4+ years to implement the law. I think we viewed it with much urgency. We spent a lot of time working through it and trying to make sure it addressed major issues that were outstanding. And with an issue as urgent as that, it's difficult for me to sit here and understand how it takes 4 years to implement. I talked in my opening statement about how we just passed a 1,000-page bill, and so I assure you that all of us up here have strong concern about the FAA's ability to implement that with the urgency that we intend. And so I would like for you to submit something to us in the record following up on why this has been so difficult and so time-consuming. And I'll say it a second time at this hearing, I know that you've inherited much, but perhaps your feedback can help us understand how we can write laws in ways that are more efficient or allow the FAA to implement with the urgency that I think we intend. With that, I'm going to yield for a second round to Mr. Larson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. Just some follow-ups that I had on a few of the questions that have been asked. One is after the 90-day plan came out in May, or maybe a little before that, you had a flood of whistleblower calls to the Air 21 number. A lot of news made about how many calls there were in local papers back home. Has that leveled off, or is the rate at which you're receiving calls the same?
We have received a large volume of whistleblower calls, and they get investigated as part of the process. And we view that as a healthy sign. We want people to speak up, so we take each one seriously, and it runs through a safety analysis and an investigation process.
Has the number leveled off in terms of the rate of calls coming in?
I'll circle back with your office and give you specifics on the sort of month-to-month level.
That would be fine. Back to an earlier question I had about proactive versus reactive. There is criticism the FAA is trending behind other civil aviation authorities in transitioning from a reactive approach to a proactive approach. And can you highlight, just again for the record, maybe the 3 steps to show that the FAA is moving towards a proactive approach on these issues?
Well, I think the essence of the proactive approach is more reliance on data and better tools to analyze the data. So right now, if you view the aviation safety system as a series of layers that protect us from bad outcomes, right now we're noticing layers that are failing and then addressing that. We want to be ahead of that to try to understand layers that may have some weakness. So really just kind of move one step ahead of that process.
Is that changing your organization at the FAA to do that?
So we're going to change there's an executive committee that oversees safety. We're going to reconstitute that committee. We're going to make sure the administrator is on that committee and chairing that committee. And that's going to be the committee that has a holistic view of the various actors in the NAS and how they're doing on safety. So we have a sort of a NAS-wide view of safety based on data. That's ambitious because getting data and analyzing data is challenging and expensive, but that's the goal.
Getting back to maybe Mr. Collins' comments earlier about the data systems at the FAA, is this going to require an additional investment, a new investment into more likely than not software models that use our AI algorithms to search for trends that then can be highlighted for you all as decision makers?
It's a little early to know what the investments might be and what our options are. We're running some trial programs with some outside vendors who are basically going to show us some capabilities that we could utilize. We'll assess those test cases and start to put together some assessment. It's an issue that we have to work extensively with industry on, and also work with our colleagues at IASA and elsewhere to make sure we have a full set of data, and we shouldn't all have to reinvent the wheel. We should come up with a system that allows everybody to have access to data that gives them insight into safety risk.
I know we're probably a little bit of ways from it, and this will be the last comment I have in question, but at some point, you're using the KPIs to determine that on-off switch for production rate increases at the Renton plant for the 737 MAX. And again, I'm not suggesting that you're at a point where you can turn that on at all. It's not. But I do think that getting to that point, as you are getting to that point, letting us helping us understand the progress of the progress on meeting the KPIs that then lead to that decision. It'd be helpful for us so that we're not surprised by an FAA decision to turn those lights green on production, just to assure us that, again, you're doing your work, holding Boeing accountable, so we can do our work to hold you accountable.
Yeah, I will, I think right now we're following this labor action, which obviously has interrupted production.
Yeah,
So
right.
I think
You're not the only one.
at some point in the future, we'll have a briefing with you on, as production starts to ramp up, more visibility into how we see that progressing.
Just assure me and assure us that that you're going to keep us in a loop on that. So
We'll do
there's
that.
less of a surprise. Thanks a lot. Yield back.
Gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Menendez, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member. Thank you for your testimony here today. I know we're in the home stretch here, and I appreciate your patience. I just want to go over a couple of topics first with respect to Boeing. You know, when we have folks, different industry participants come in and we talk about safety, often safety is everyone's #1 priority, but obviously there's always the tension between profits and safety. From your perspective, how has Boeing historically and more recently handled the tension between prioritizing safety while also being a money-making enterprise?
I think it's an interesting question. I would hope that at this point they've concluded that without safety, the profits aren't going to follow under any circumstance. And I think for all operators in our airspace, whether it's a airliner or a manufacturer, if you don't meet those fundamental safety requirements of building a safety culture and an open, just culture that allows whistleblowers to step forward, it's going to be very hard to sustain your business. So hopefully that's been a lesson learned. From our perspective, that has to be the first order of business. And to your point, everybody talks about it, but not everybody does it. So our focus is to making sure they're actually doing it.
Yeah, and obviously we always hope folks self-regulate, right, and do right by their customers and by the entire industry, right, because safety is our #1 priority. You saw that with the FAA reauthorization through this committee. But I also find it sort of thinking about ways that we can ensure there are guardrails and hardwiring safety being the priority, because when you do have a time of stability and ensured safety, sometimes the attention shifts, right? And what we need to ensure for all American people who use these aircraft, who travel through commercial airlines, to ensure that people are always focused on safety, even when there's not been an incident like what we're here to discuss today, that refocuses back on safety and sort of that continuous dogged approach to making sure that we are always best in class in safety is something that, you know, on your end and our end, we want to make sure that we're always thinking about, so that way we don't need an incident to return to the table to have a conversation about safety.
And I think one of the things as we look at our own oversight model is to make sure we're looking at the right data, so we get early indicators when that trend occurs and someone takes their eye off the ball.
I appreciate it. If you don't mind, I just want to switch gears briefly. Last time you testified before this committee, we spoke about the persistent issue of helicopter noise in my district, New Jersey's 8th Congressional District. Earlier this month, we held a workshop with the FAA in Jersey City to begin working towards a solution. I thank the FAA for their participation in this workshop. I look forward to continuing to work with you on putting an end to this problem. In the interim, I wanted to talk briefly about the FAA Reauthorization Act and the FAA's efforts to implement the new law. Section 792 of this law requires the FAA to establish a noise advisory committee. It is my understanding that the FAA is currently working to stand up this committee. Can you provide a brief update on the status of the Noise Advisory Committee?
We are scheduled to provide a staff briefing in just, I think, about 2 weeks on all of the reauth provisions, so we'll make sure that that is part of that. I don't have any specific information, but we can get that to your office directly as well.
No, I appreciate it. And sort of in the coming weeks before we have that staff meeting, I think what's so incredibly important for us, so I represent a densely populated district, And so there's a heliport on one side of the district and New York City on the other. Statue of Liberty sits right off our shoreline. You can tell Dan Goldman the Statue of Liberty is in New Jersey, not New York. He'll appreciate it. But what I think is important is making sure that as this noise advisory committee is set up, that sort of in certain areas where we really deal with noise and noise pollution, densely populated areas, because we also have Newark Airport in the district, that we get community stakeholders to be a part of the process, because it was one of the challenges that we had with the voluntary air tourism agreements that created these buffer zones, which actually put helicopters into my district, right? When we're trying to eliminate or reduce the volume of trips. And so without having the communities that are subject to all of this noise at the table, I feel like that voice is lost. And I think it's something that's critically important to make sure that they're a part of the process. And any way that we can include stakeholders like that as you think about the committee would be extremely, it would be very much appreciated by myself and so many others.
Yeah, I will. I think that you make a very good point, and I think that's true. We will do that.
All right, thank you, and I yield back.
Thanks.
Administrator, I'm going to recognize myself, and then we'll wrap here. In the FAA bill, I've described a lot of the provisions we included in there were sort of the Congress acting on behalf of the administrator in cases when I think decisions kind of got backlogged prior to you coming on board. One of those is on BVLOS, and I know that we had some pretty strict language with very tight timelines. And I know that the FAA pushed back a little bit and said timelines were unreasonable. I would argue that when laws have put a timeline in place, then what an agency should do is calibrate their answer to the time that's available. Could you give us an update on the timing for BVLOS, which of course is beyond visual line of sight for unmanned systems?
Yes, sir. It's, I think the internal goal had been early January since the onset, and we hope to exceed that. We're hoping to have that out, if not the next few weeks, by the end of the year.
Okay. Administrator, thank you. And just along the lines of some of the new entrants in the market, as you know, there were a number of provisions in the FAA bill. Those are strong priorities for me and for this committee in that I'm concerned if we don't provide better certainty for those innovators, for those entrepreneurs, we're going to see those folks take their resources and go overseas. And I know that you're aware in some cases where that has occurred. It's not just about the platforms themselves, it's about the technology associated with those as well, including some of the sensors and others, in addition to the conveniences that it can apply in Louisiana. We recently had Hurricane Francine, and having the ability to send out reconnaissance aircraft, unmanned platforms to go out there and go do some of the recon helps us to triage our response activities and resources. We could sit here and talk for days about all the application, and I just really want to emphasize to you the importance of providing predictability, regulatory certainty for these folks so they can get investment certainty. I think that's fair, and I think they deserve it. A few things closer to home. We have a provision related to NIPIAS airports and in populated counties, or I know the other 49 states are confused. We call them parishes at home. And I just want to highlight the provision in the bill related to that. Very, very important. We also have another provision related to expanding the use of innovative technology into the Gulf of Mexico. That's really important, and I'd appreciate you working and making sure that those provisions are prioritized, and we're not talking about the implementation of them years from now, that hopefully months from now we can get some clarity on interpretation there.
Great. Thanks, Joe. We'll do that, sir.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm going to yield back, and I don't see any other further questions from the subcommittee. And so that concludes our hearing today, and I want to thank the administrator for being here and again for your perseverance through the subcommittee.
Great. Thank you.